Mr. Strong to the Rescue by Roger Hargreaves. Mr. Strong is the strongest man in the world. Mr. Strong is so strong that he can carry 5 sacks full of potatoes. Mr. Strong is so strong that he can push a tree over. Can you push a tree over? You have to be very strong to do that. Once, Mr. Strong helped his friend Mr. Slow. Mr. Slow's steamroller had rolled into a ditch. Mr. Strong just pulled it out. Do you know why Mr. Strong is so strong? It is because he eats lots of eggs. He eats eggs for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. One morning, the mailman brought Mr. Strong a letter. It was from Mr. Sneeze. It said, "Come to Shivertown for a winter vacation." Now, Shivertown is in cold land, and in cold land it snows every day. So Mr. Strong packed his suitcase with lots of warm clothes. Then Mr. Strong went to the station to catch a train. He brought a ticket to Shivertown and some egg sandwiches to eat on the way. Mr. Strong loves trains. Mr. Puff, the engineer, lets Mr. Strong ride in the engine. "All aboard!" cried Mr. Puff. The train puffed out of the station. Soon, Mr. Puff and all his passengers were speeding along. "Woo, woo!" went the whistle. Suddenly, Mr. Strong saw something big on the railroad tracks. "Stop the train!" shouted Mr. Strong. "Stop the train at once!" Mr. Puff stopped the train just in time. A big rock had rolled onto the railroad tracks. "What can we do?" cried Mr. Puff. "Just leave this to me," said Mr. Strong. Mr. Strong climbed down from the engine. He just lifted the rock out of the way. Mr. Puff and his passengers were so pleased. "Hooray for Mr. Strong!" they all shouted, and everyone climbed back on the train. It was snowing when the train got to Shivertown. Mr. Strong saw Mr. Sneeze. Poor Mr. Sneeze was so cold that he had a red nose. Everyone in Shivertown had a red nose. Mr. Strong even saw a red-nosed dog. The red-nosed dog was chasing a red-nosed cat. Mr. Sneeze was looking very worried. "We must hurry to Shivertown Bay," he told Mr. Strong. "Shivertown is in danger." So, Mr. Sneeze and Mr. Strong ran down to Shivertown Bay. The biggest iceberg in the world was floating in the sea. "That iceberg is going to crash into Shivertown," cried Mr. Sneeze. "All of Shivertown will be covered with ice." "Just leave this to me," said Mr. Strong. Then Mr. Strong gave the iceberg a push. The iceberg was pushed right out to sea. In fact, Mr. Strong had pushed the iceberg to the other side of the world. It was so hot there, the iceberg melted in the sun. "Hooray for Mr. Strong!" shouted the people of Shivertown. The King of Coldland came to Shivertown and gave Mr. Strong a medal. Then they all had a special party. Can you guess what they had to eat? That's right, egg sandwiches. Can you find these words in this book? An engine on page 9. A palm tree on page 21. A fir tree on page 13. A polar bear on page 18. A goat on page 12. A policeman on page 16. A hat on page 7. A sack on page 2. An iceberg on page 18. A signal on page 10. A medal on page 22. And a suitcase on page 8.